today's story is about one of hundreds of insane bank robbery stories from the late 20th century, because for whatever reason, they were comically frequent and had an absurdly high success rate as well. But oddly, the vast majority of these heists would result in shockingly few casualties, one of which you may have heard of, the famous North Hollywood Shootout, of which involved two complete juggernauts with full body armor, several fully automatic weapons, and an estimated 2,000 rounds being fired. And if you're not already aware of this story, that probably sounds like a tragedy to you. But like I mentioned before, oddly, the only two casualties suffered in the entire shooting were the perpetrators, which earns today's story the title of The Bloodiest Shootout in FBI History. Now, I'll keep this brief because there is a lot to go over in this story, but most of my info comes from these sources, so if you care about that at all, feel free to pause and check them out. But I'm going to go ahead and get into the story. So before we get started, I noticed that at a certain point, the names in this story get a little bit confusing, especially towards the end, because just about everybody's name starts with M for some reason. So the two names that you really need to keep track of, Michael Lee Platt and William Russell Matee. I'll be referring to them by their last names, which are Platt and Matee. So those are the bad guys. Matee first served in the U.S. Marine Corps as a cook starting in 1969 and was honorably discharged in July of 1972. Matee then enlisted in the Army in August of 1973 under the 101st Airborne Division in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. To be honest, I don't know what that means, but the important part is they were both stationed in Fort Campbell, because Platt enlisted in the Army in 1972, but was assigned to the Military Police Unit after he graduated Air Assault School in 1973. So that's where the two men in today's story came to know each other. Now, to preface, the events in today's story aren't exactly the first time they attempted to commit a robbery, and allegedly, it wasn't their first time committing murder either. Because you see, Matee wasn't the only person Platt met during his time in the Army, because he also met his wife, Regina Leland. And you may be thinking, that's a weird way to segue into how he met his wife. But as it turns out, the romantic relationships of both men are incredibly complicated, but also very relevant to the story, so I'm going to draw all this as well as the eventual firefight out on my whiteboard, just to make things totally clear, because they're a little bit convoluted, but even then, I've still tried my best to make it as concise as possible, so you can just listen to this if you want without the visual, because I know I do that a lot. On December 30th, 1983, Matee's wife, Patricia Mary, and her co-worker, Joyce McFadden, were both found stabbed to death in Riverside Methodist Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, having been bound and gagged with their throats slashed. Now do you get why I gave you that intro? And although I'm not 100% sure of the context of this questioning, Matee told investigators he suspected Platt had been carrying on an affair with his wife at the time. I'm not sure how that's relevant to any of this, or if it is, it doesn't really say, but after his wife's death, Matee moves to Florida due to Platt's influence, and the two of them got jobs at a local landscaping company owned by Platt's father-in-law, Regina's father, and in 1985, Matee remarried to Christy Luhorn, which is not even 2 years after the brutal murder of his ex-wife, by the way, and not even 2 months after getting married, his wife Christy moves out because he became so enraged that she was pregnant that it became violent. Not only that, but although Platt's side is relatively empty, he also didn't have a great history with relationships, because on December 21st, 1984, his wife Regina, whom he had married 9 years earlier in 1975, so a very long marriage, was found dead in their home from a shotgun blast to the mouth, her death being ruled a suicide. However, in a suspiciously swift turn of events, Platt remarries just a few weeks later in January 1985 to his second wife, Brenda Horn. Now, if this last name seems familiar, I'm pretty sure this is the sister of Matee's wife, but take that with a grain of salt, because I couldn't really find a definitive answer to that. But I do find it pretty hard to believe that the two of them got married to women of the same last name 2 months apart, and they're not related, so take that for what you will. But now we can get on to the part that's not alleged. On October 5th, 1985, Platt and Matee murdered 25-year-old Emilio Briel while he was target shooting at a rock pit. And although I have a fair bit of firearm knowledge myself, I have no idea what a rock pit is. Is it like the place where you shoot the clay discs or whatever? I don't know. That sounds like it's what they're describing, but I've never heard them referred to as a rock pit. But anyways, the pair stole Briel's car and used it to commit several robberies. On October 10th, the duo attempted to rob a Wells Fargo armored truck at a Winn-Dixie supermarket. Although this robbery attempt was a failure, because the only thing that ultimately came of it was a guard getting shot in the leg, no money was taken, but the guard did later pass away from his injuries. So, That marks their first confirmed murder. A few weeks later, on November 8, 1985, the pair robbed a professional savings bank in Miami, making out with $41,469 in 3 Wells Fargo armored car money bags that had been delivered that morning. Now, it's not stated if they had been staking out this location, waiting for the money to be delivered, but I'd find it hard to believe they didn't. But after a several-month hiatus, they resumed their robberies on January 10th, 1986, attacking another armored truck, this time at Barnett Bank in Miami. The attack was initiated by one of the pair shooting a guard in the back with a 12-gauge shotgun. The two of them then approached the guard and shot him twice with a .223 rifle, described by witnesses as an AR-15 or M16. Afterwards, they escaped with somewhere in the range of $54,000 in the car they had stolen months earlier. So they were still driving that thing around at this point, despite successfully even committing several robberies. But a civilian followed them from the scene of the crime and witnessed them at this point swap to an F-150 pickup truck. So it seems to me like they'll commit the robbery in this car, and then after getting the attention off of them, they swap to another vehicle. By the way, the guard they shot, he did live, but he had over 100 shotgun pellets in his body, which tells me if they were using 12-gauge, and they were, either they shot him like 10 times and he survived, or they're using birdshot, and I would probably lean towards the latter. And you could say they weren't aiming to kill him, so that's why they used such wimpy rounds, but at that rate, I don't see why they would have double tapped him with an AR, so I think that's kind of null. I kind of think they're just idiots. On March 12th, they robbed and shot Jose Calazo, who was just like Emilio Briel, at a rock pit target shooting. Once again, that confusing phrasing, but it seems to be their favorite place to steal cars. Why did I write Calazo? Calanzo. It's Calazo. Anyway, they would then leave Calazo for dead and steal his Chevy Monte Carlo. 1 week later, on March 19th, carrying a pump shotgun and a rifle, they robbed a Barnett Bank, the same location they had shot the armored car carrier a few months earlier, this time making out with $8,338. Now you may be thinking, if they murdered one guy, stole his car, and then used that car to rob a bank truck, killing a guard, then successfully robbed a bank, killing another guy to steal his car, and then robbing another bank, how the hell are they still just driving around 6 months later, having killed at least 2 people, possibly 4 if you include the suspicious circumstances of their wives' deaths, the attempted murder of 2 others, and stolen over $100,000? Well, as it turns out, you're not the only one thinking that, because due to this insane crime spree, they had attracted the attention of the FBI. Because you see, that second guy they robbed that they took the Monte Carlo from, Jose Calazo, he ended up surviving and reporting his car stolen. So the FBI knew exactly what they were looking for, which the 2 men were unaware of this, which would give the FBI quite the upper hand in identifying the suspects. At 8:45 a.m. on April 11th, 1986, a team of FBI agents led by Special Agent Gordon McNeil assembled in Miami, Florida, with the intention of initiating a rolling stakeout, searching for the black Monte Carlo. Now, it said these agents were acting on a hunch that the duo would attempt a robbery that morning. It's not explicitly stated what the hunch was, even in the official documents. However, what is known is a total of 14 FBI agents in 11 cars participated in the stakeout, 8 of which took part in the shootout that was to come. At 9:30 a.m., Agents Grogan and Dove spotted the suspect's vehicle and began to follow them in a way as to not arouse any suspicion from them. 2 other stakeout team cars joined soon after, and eventually, Special Agents Grogan and Dove attempted to execute a traffic stop on the suspect's vehicle. The perpetrators, as you may have guessed, did not pull over, and instead were forced off the road following several collisions with all 3 of the pursuing vehicles. These collisions sent the suspect's car nose first into a tree in a small parking lot in front of a house at 12201 Southwest 82nd Avenue, pinning the suspect's car between a car parked on its passenger side and Agent Manauzi's car on the driver's side. So now that we know what the scene looks like and how everything got in its place, let's go over the position that Platt and Matee find themselves in. Now, before we get into all this, for context, this is a picture of all the guns retrieved from the scene, both from the suspects and the police themselves. Now, it's worth noting that not all of the weapons in the photo were used, because only 8 of the agents in 5 cars, as you can see, participated in the firefight or even showed up at the scene at all. Of the agents at the scene, 2 had Remington 870 shotguns, 3 had Smith & Wesson .459 9mm pistols. The rest had Smith & Wesson revolvers, 2 .357 Magnums, and 5 .38 Specials. And 2 of them had backup .38 Specials. The way that's phrased is a little bit weird to me, but I don't know, maybe I'm stupid. So not only were the suspects outgunned and outnumbered, they had also just crashed into a tree, which did not bode well for them, as you could imagine. However, the collision did seem to cause just as many problems for the agents as it did for the suspects, as we're about to see. because prior to ramming the Monte Carlo, Agent Manuzzi had pulled out his service revolver and placed it on the passenger seat before the crash in anticipation of a shootout. However, having not expected such a violent collision, his weapon either flew out of his windshield or onto the floor of his cruiser, which he did not have enough time to retrieve because very shortly after, Platt in the passenger seat of the Monte Carlo picks up his Ruger Mini 14 and opens fire at Manuzzi's car. I don't know if you can see it from there, but I drew little boxes for the little men, and it seems like he misses, so I'm going to do a little arrow for misses and X's for hits. Now it says Agent Hanlon also lost his .357 Magnum revolver, as well as his glasses due to the collision, but he was still able to fight using his backup Model 36, which I think is the 38 Special, if I'm not mistaken. But what confuses me about this is, that's their car. From what I can tell, they weren't really in a collision, but that's what it says, so I don't know. Sorry for the interruption, but this whole section about the glasses flying off, I keep saying Hanlon. It was actually Grogan, and I realized that once I was editing, and I had to pull the quote that I reference in the next clip. But the good news is, the whole thing still applies, because Grogan was in the car in the middle, which as far as I can tell also was not in an accident. So. Now it said that his vision was so bad without his glasses that he couldn't effectively fight, but according to the FBI's medical director, Hanlon's vision was not that bad. But who's really to say? All we know definitively is that he didn't injure anyone that he didn't intend to, so I guess that's what's important. Agent Grogan is credited with landing the first hit on the suspects. As far as I can tell, either still in his car, firing through the windshield, or at the very least on the outside of his car using his driver's side door as cover. That's what I picture at least. But anyways, with the shot that he takes, he wounds Matee in his forearm as he was leaning out of the Monte Carlo to fire his Smith & Wesson Model 300 shotgun, firing at least one shot at Grogan and Dove, missing. Have I been saying Manuzzi this whole time? I just realized. Manuzzi, I think. Agent Manuzzi was unable to recover his revolver from earlier and was wounded in the head and back by a shotgun blast by Matee. So, once again, another shot that landed. McNeil, firing over the hood of Manuzzi's car, was also wounded by return fire from Platt. Platt then fires his rifle at Mireles, who was running across the street to join the fight, hitting him in his forearm and wounding him severely. Platt then pulls back from the window, giving Matee the opportunity to open fire, and likely giving Platt time to reload because he's fired so many shots. Because of course, at this point, they still had to be very careful because effectively, Matee was shooting over Platt's lap, just in front of his face, which is terrifying. So they could only shoot one at a time. It was at this point Matee attempted to exit the vehicle, realizing he had been pinned in by the neighboring Cutlass that they had crashed into. So he then turns around and fires another shotgun round at Grogan and Dave, again striking the agent's car. McNeil then returns fire with all 6 shots out of his revolver, landing 3 on Matee, 1 in the forearm and 2 others to the head and neck. Matee at this point was knocked unconscious and fires no more rounds for the remainder of the gunfight. McNeil was then shot once again, presumably by Platt, given Matee was unconscious, in the hand. And due to this wound, as well as the blood in his revolver's chambers, he was no longer able to participate in the firefight. Platt then climbs out of the passenger side window of the Monte Carlo, and just as he was doing this, one of Dove's 9mm rounds hits his upper arm and went on to penetrate his chest, stopping 1 inch shy of his heart. And although he had already suffered the injury that would mean his death, he still continued on, climbing across the hood of a car parked next to theirs, the Oldsmobile Cutlass, and as he did so, he was shot a second and third time, thought to also be Dove in the right thigh and left foot. Platt then assumes a position by the passenger side front fender, and he fired a .357 Magnum revolver at agents Rinser and Oratina, and was shot a 4th time by those 2 agents. Once again in the forearm, a lot of forearm shots in this time shattering a bone, causing him to drop his revolver just after turning to fire at Hanlon, Dove, and Grogan. Now I'm going to read this next bit verbatim because it left me a little bit confused. It is estimated that Platt was shot a 5th time shortly afterwards, this time by Rinser, and the bullet penetrated Platt's right upper arm, exited below the armpit, and entered his torso, stopping below his shoulder blade. The wound was not serious. What do you mean it was estimated he was shot a 5th time? Now they don't phrase it this way for any of the other events in this story, so why does it say they estimate he was shot a 5th time? The only reason I could think of is he had an additional bullet wound that they couldn't quite account for, because all this information is coming from either FBI.gov, the coroner's report, or these news channels. So, that's kind of my best guess. But anyways, Platt then fired 5 rounds total from his Mini 14, 1 round at Oratina, wounding him on the left shoulder, 2 more at McNeil, 1 hit McNeil in the neck, causing him to collapse and leaving him paralyzed, another at Dove, hitting his pistol and rendering it inoperable, and another at Hanlon, hitting him in the hand. At this time, Hanlon and Dove were kneeling alongside the driver's side of their car, right there, both of them being too preoccupied with Dove's now malfunctioning weapon to realize that Platt was headed straight for them. And as Platt rounds the corner of their car, he fires 4 more times, killing Grogan with a shot to the chest, shot Hanlon in the groin area, and killed Dove with 2 shots to the head. Platt then enters Grogan and Dove's car in an attempt to flee, but as he was getting into the car, Mireles, using his only functioning arm, fires 1 of 5 rounds from his pump shotgun, wounding Platt in both feet. Now, unlike the last confusing bit, this next report is pretty upfront, stating that at an unknown time, Matee has regained consciousness and joined Platt in the car, entering via the passenger door. So basically there were no eyes on him whatsoever during this time, which is kind of understandable, given half of the officers in the shootout are already out of commission, and they probably thought he was dead anyway, given that he stopped moving and they were shooting at him. But it was around that time that 3 Metro-Dade police officers arrived at the scene. Martin Heckerman covered a paralyzed McNeil with his own body, and Rick Fry assisted Hanlon. Now, it's not really said who the 3rd officer is, so we don't really know what he did, but Platt's actions at this moment were debated. One witness states that Platt left the car walking 20 feet and firing at Agent Mireles 3 times. Mireles doesn't remember the gunshots, and Officer Heckerman, as well as Agents Rinser and Ortega, don't remember Platt even leaving the car. So, who knows what really happened? However, what is known for certain is Platt did use Matee's revolver at some point to fire 3 rounds. So it seems like everyone is a little bit disoriented at this point, and you can't really blame them, but that's okay, because the rest of this is definitive. Platt then attempted to start the Grogan Dove car, while Mireles drew his .357 Magnum and moved directly towards Platt and Matee. Mireles fired all 6 of his rounds. The first round missed, the second round hit the driver's side window pillar and fragmented, 1 small piece hitting Platt in the scalp. The third hit Matee in the face and fragmented in 2, neither piece causing a serious injury. And the last 2, I'll spare you the explicit details because it goes into kind of gross detail, given this is from the coroner's report. The 5th hit Matee in the face again, this time causing a fatal injury, and the 6th hit Platt in the chest, doing the same, thus ending the gunfight. And there you go. That's the whole scene. It's a lot of shots, it's a lot of movement, but this is pretty much what happened. The perpetrators, of course, are dead, as well as 2 of the officers. We'll get into what happened to the rest of the officers right now. So, as this shootout came to be, as I said in the beginning, the bloodiest shootout in FBI history, because in less than 5 minutes, which is how long it took for this event to unfold in real time, 145 shots were exchanged, which may not sound like much when you take into account the famous North Hollywood shootout with its 2,000 rounds. However, that event took place over about an hour. However, in that example, the perpetrators had several fully automatic rifles equipped with drum mags, and there was several dozen officers at the scene. On a more historical note, and how I actually found this story, after the shootout, an FBI investigation placed partial blame of the deaths of the 2 officers in this case on the lack of stopping power from their service weapons. Also noting the difficulty of reloading a revolver under fire, because it took them until now to figure that out for some reason, despite the fact that they had semi-auto pistols in World War I. But regardless, this led the FBI to develop the Smith & Wesson 1076, to which allegedly many agents couldn't withstand the kick of a 10mm cartridge, which is kind of confusing to me because in this exact case, 2 of the agents and both of the suspects were using .357 Magnum revolvers, which kicks the same, if not more, than a 10mm. But stupid logic aside, this led the FBI to collaborate with Smith & Wesson once more to develop a cartridge based on the 10mm, with a bit less kick. So this event was a major contributing factor to the development of the .40 Smith & Wesson pistol cartridge, as well as the reason that police largely carry semi-auto pistols today, even though despite all this, the standard issue carry for officers in the US is a Glock 19 9mm. So it was a bit of a failure, but I still thought it was interesting, as was the additional concern that despite these agents being on the stakeout for 2 violent felons who were definitely armed, the officers didn't have any rifles in their possession, nor body armor to protect against .223 from a rifle that they were well aware the suspects were absolutely in possession of, because they had used it in prior robberies. Because even today, it's not standard for officers to carry rifles, although level 3A body armor is now standard even for police officers. I thought about cutting that bit because I thought it might be a little boring, but I then realized that was probably the most sus series of searches one can possibly do, and I'm definitely on a list now. Christy Lou Horn also gave birth to Mattee's son after his father's death, because remember how he got so mad that she was pregnant before she moved out? Yeah, that's his son having been born, so kinda happy note. Happy in the fact that there was no complications, but, you know, he grew up without a father, so. Also, the family of Jerry Dove and Ben Grogan sued the estates of Platt and Mattee under the RICO statute for damages. However, the lawsuit was dismissed because the families did not allege the kind of recovery that RICO was designed to afford, which is a bit of a double-edged sword in my opinion, because as much as I would love to see them compensated for the death of their loved one, but on the other hand, that's not what RICO is, like at all. It's a racketeering act, so that's for financial crimes, not murder, or wrongdoing by the FBI, so I don't think that's really a valid case, unfortunately. And one more thing, if you remember how I mentioned McNeil was paralyzed from that round to the neck, the good news is he turned out to be fine, and he was only paralyzed for a few hours. Overall, what I thought was a pretty interesting story, and a relatively significant one in regards to the history of firearms. You know, spawning the 40 Smith & Wesson, and it's really the reason that police carry semi-auto pistols rather than revolvers today. But that's about it. There's not a whole lot more about this after the fact, not really any conspiracies or dramatic twists. They were kind of just outgunned. But before I go, I gotta say, it may be a little bit before my next video, hopefully not this long, but I am working on reconfiguring my entire set. Imagine this lighting, but better, because I'll no longer be using a lamp on a stack of books. But for those of you that have stayed this long, if you haven't already, leave a comment, give me a like, maybe even subscribe. I think that'd be pretty cool. But at the end of the day, you simply watching the video, it really means the world. So, thanks for watching. See ya.